Well, hi there. Don't really know how to kick this off other than just to say welcome to my first stream, as I'm going to spend a bit of time working on Node-RED. I've followed quite a few people who do this sort of streaming what they're working on, streaming, helping get people involved. And I thought it'd be fun to do with Node-RED. And there's no shortage of things I could work on with Node-RED. Whether it's working on new features for the next release, issues, reviewing pull requests, whatever really. So if there's something particular you'd be interested to see me do on a live stream like this, just let me know in the chat here or in the forum, however you want to feed it back. I haven't really planned out too much. I know what I'm going to be working on in this session. I haven't fully planned it out end to end, but basically the goal is there's a particular feature that I'll introduce in a minute for the editor, and the goal is through this session I'll sort of walk through the process I follow for developing new features, and we'll see how we get on. Hopefully by the end of it we'll have a pull request, which hopefully someone else in the project can then review and merge, and will be part of the next release. So I feel the need to just preface this with this. The first time I'm doing this sort of streaming, I've been playing around with, did a couple of test runs over the weekend, and it all seemed to go okay, but well, we'll just have to try it. So I'm used to doing video conferences and web streams and stuff like that, but I'm also used to having people talking back at me. So do say hi if you're watching in the chat. Let me know you're there. I think I've got it set up so I can see the chat. And yeah, ask questions as we go along, and hopefully we can these can be worthwhile. And if it's worthwhile, try and do it semi-regularly. This is quite a good slot for me to be doing this, just in terms of everything going on in the world. Obviously everyone's spending a lot of time at home right now, and what better way than to get on when you can, when the family allows, with some actual coding. So hi Julian in the chat, Total Information, good to see you here. Glad you could join us, but that's also good to know that I can see the chat and it's not an inert window. And Jessica from Germany, welcome. So like I said, do shout if I'm not talking about the things you're interested in. Hopefully this is all going to work. Right, so what are we talking about here? So just to be clear, I am developing a feature for Node-RED. This isn't about how to use Node-RED. Well, I'm happy to do that sort of session. Hopefully, if I've set it all up now, we should start seeing my desktop, my terminal, and here we are in Google. So this is about kind of how to get started developing a feature in Node-RED. I'm going to sort of assume people who are familiar with the basics of how you pull down, how you fork a repository, and how you pull it down locally. Here's the main Node-RED repo. You can clone it locally. I already have it locally in my local terminal. And by default you have the master branch. So I guess the first thing to talk about when we develop code in the Node-RED project, the basic scheme we follow is we have the master branch is the current released code. So what's that, 1.0.6 at the moment. So it's the current stable release plus any bug fixes that we've made, that we've added, that will roll into the next maintenance release, so 1.0.7. All of the new features, any new feature goes into the next milestone release, which will be 1.1, and that happens in our dev branch. Well, typically it will happen in a feature branch, and once we're happy with it, it then merges into dev. Let's switch back. So here we are in master. So first things first, let me just make sure I'm all up to date. I think I am. I don't think anything's gone in since I did this earlier. So we want to be in the dev branch. Just going to rerun npm install just to make sure I've got all the latest of everything. So it's worth also adding what you're going to see in the screenshots. You're going to get a preview of the 1.1 release and some of the new features. I may take a little bit of time just to show you those. Yeah, things do look a little different in some places, but that's what's coming in 1.1. Let me just mute my phone, as I've no doubt you'll be able to hear everything that's going on. And it's Amazon telling me they've just delivered the USB-C dongle I desperately needed to do this live stream that I've had to bodge around not having. I'll take a behind the scenes photo at some point of this setup. Because when my work office closed down a couple of months ago, I nipped in and I cleared my desk of all the sort of computer accessories I have at work so I could set things up here. And the one thing I left on my desk at work was my USB-C HDMI adapter, which wasn't a problem when I'm just working at home on the laptop, but when I kind of wanted to set things up with multiple screens, I suddenly realised last week I didn't have it. Anyway, all of that aside, a few more guys have joined in the chat. Hello from India, hello from the Netherlands. Some familiar faces, well, familiar names in that list. Hi to you all. Anyway, let's crack on. So we're in the dev branch. I've npm installed, so I've got all the latest stuff. Node-RED project uses Grunt as its build system, and if I just run Grunt by itself, it'll build all the code and then run all of the unit tests. That's not what we want to do. What we want to run is the Grunt Dev Task. So this is basically how I run Node-RED 99% of the time when I'm developing it. What it does is it runs a build, so builds the editor and all its components, and then it runs Node-RED. But it sets up a watcher, so it's watching all of the runtime source code and all the editor source code. If I edit any of the files in the editor, it'll automatically rebuild the editor assets. If I edit any of the files in the runtime, it'll restart the runtime. So because in Node-RED, if you change the runtime, obviously you've got to restart, but if you edit nodes, that type of stuff, you have to restart the runtime to pick up those changes. For this session, I'm just doing stuff in the editor. So again, Grunt Dev is what you want because it rebuilds the JavaScript and the CSS in real time for us. So with that running, switch over to Chrome and then localhost 1880. So for the eagle-eyed amongst you, when I loaded the editor, you would have spotted one of the new additions. So we've added in a progress bar for when the editor's loading up. Partly because there's, depending how many nodes you've got installed in the palette, it can seemingly freeze for a second or so whilst it's loading all the nodes, or longer depending on your network connection. Depending on how big your flows are, it can take a little while. So just to hide some of the flickering of the editor as it builds all of its content up, we've added that progress bar here. But in this very clean install of Node-RED, I haven't got a lot in, so it's pretty quick. If I refresh, you may see it just flash past. Other new things, this isn't intended to be a tour of 1.1, but I may as well show you because I'm sure you'll be wondering. Over in the right-hand side, the info sidebar, it's had a bit of a rework and a refresh. So we now have this, what we're calling the outliner, which is a tree view of all of the things in your flow. And at the moment, I've just got a flow and it is empty. And if I add in some nodes into the workspace, you can see they start appearing in that list. And if I were to add some more flows, again, they start appearing. And we can do things like search in that to find items. Once you find it, if you click the magnifying glass, it'll jump to and reveal the item in your workspace. And then there's this button here, which means you can now toggle whether the node is enabled or disabled with one click, rather than having to open up the edit dialog. For well, let's just clear the search. I panicked why my debug node wasn't there because I had the filters turned on. If I just make a complete flow, you'll note, if I hover over the function node, it's got the search button and it's got the enable disabled toggle. If I hover over the inject or debug, it's got this extra button. Now I'm not fully settled on the icon for that button yet, but clicking that clicks the button on the node, which I can't because it's not deployed. So let's deploy that. So I click that, and that is the same as clicking the button on the inject node. Or if I click the one below, that's clicking the button on the debug node. Handy feature, hopefully, when you've got lots of injects. This will give you a nice list of them, and you can much easily toggle them. Something that has changed is the help has moved. So the help is no longer on the info sidebar. There is a new help sidebar that refreshes as you click around, as it did before, with a table of contents at the top. Now, at the moment, the table of contents is structured by node modules and all the nodes that provide help. So you can actually now just browse the help quite freely without having to select a node first. And we've structured this in a way that we could add other inline help to the editor, like a getting started guide, that type of stuff, actually in the editor directly. That may not be in 1.1, that sort of getting started stuff, but we'll see. Anyway, enough of the new. I don't want to distract with the new. On to what I'm actually going to be developing in this session. So, in fact, this came up on the forum a couple of weeks ago. Someone asked a question. There was the feature had been discussed. They asked how could they go about developing it, and I think they asked it at a time when I just wasn't in a position to get to reply. But also, it's a hard question to answer. When someone says, "How can I add this feature?" You've got to think, well, where do you begin in trying to explain? Because you don't know how much they know, you don't know where you're starting from, and actually that I'd at the same time been thinking about starting to do a live stream like this, and it just sort of clicked as actually it was a nice self-contained piece of functionality that I could do this sort of video and to show people how to go end to end of developing a feature. So let's try and stay on topic, or this will go on till way longer than I thought. If you can't tell, this is not scripted. I know what I need to do, and I'm just sort of prattling on as I go. So please do ask questions as we go in chat, but let's forge on. So the feature we're talking about here is toggling whether a node shows its label or not. So for those who aren't aware of this feature, any node, when you edit it and go to its appearance tab, you can tell it to hide its label. And when you hit done, then the node shrinks down to just its icon. So we can do that on any node. So that's handy if you want to organize your flows, or to make your flows a bit more compact. Maybe you have some nodes that don't need to take up as much room. The problem is, if you have lots of nodes, like you've created your flow and now you want to shrink lots of them down, it's a double click to open the edit dialog, another click to go to the appearance tab, a third click to toggle its state, and a fourth click to close the dialog. So that's, well, a double click and then 3 clicks following for every node you want to toggle its state. So the request was for an easy way to be able to make a selection of nodes and have a keyboard shortcut or some other means to either hide all the labels or show all the labels. So that's what we're going to do. Right, so let's talk a little bit about how we'd go about implementing that sort of feature. So one of the things that goes on under the a lot of time of my time of the sort of engineering work I do in the Node-RED editor is trying to think about making it easier to build in these sorts of components. In the early days, to add the feature I've just described, it'd be a lot of bespoke code, hardwired in, hard-coded how it gets triggered, and not very reusable. Over time, though, a lot of the internals of the editor have changed, and I forget when, but a few releases ago, we introduced this concept of actions in the editor. So the actions are a named thing that can be triggered. So, for example, well, lots of the buttons in the UI trigger an action. I'm just trying to think of a good example. So, like, well, in fact, toggling the zoom level, so zooming in and out, clicking that button actually triggers the zoom out action. So the button isn't tied to the code that actually does the work. The button just triggers that action, and the piece of code that's been registered to handle that action is what does the actual work. So Ross Reed's just asked, if a node is collapsed, does it still display node.status? Yes, it does. It still displays node.status. Obviously, because the node is smaller, that may influence how much status text you choose to share, because it'll stick out the end. We don't wrap status text, but it is still shown. So within the editor, the way that a user might encounter them is in the menu. There is where did we put it? View action list. I had to think about that because I never use the menu. I use the keyboard shortcut. So view action list gives a handy list of all of the actions that are registered in the editor, and any keyboard shortcut that has been registered with it. So it's one of those, unless you discover it, you're unlikely to know it was there. But looking through this list, you will see lots of the core things you can do, like add a flow, clear the debug messages, create a subflow, delete the selection. What else? Open up the palette manager, stuff around groups, which is another 1.1 feature, which I'll talk about. I may talk about in a minute, or later once we've got through this. I won't distract too much at the moment. Yeah, so there are lots of actions, and you can see we only have default keyboard shortcuts for a subset of them. And if you open up the keyboard shortcut panel, again, here's a list of all of those actions, and this is where you can assign your own keyboard shortcuts to them. Okay, so we've got this concept of an action. So the question is, what does that translate to in terms of code? So let's pick, there's a similar action which we'll look at. Where is it? Enable selected nodes, and its partner disable selected nodes. So these are actions, well, they do what they say. So if I select the function and debug node and do Command Shift P to bring up the action and just type in enable selected nodes, I hit enter to, oh no, they're already enabled. That'll be a bad example. So let's do disable selected nodes. I hit enter to trigger that action, and you can now see those two nodes have been disabled. And just to prove it wasn't a fluke, let's re-enable them. Okay. So quite a lot has gone on under the covers there. Let's go and have a look at the code to see how that works. Now, the trick to finding where an action is defined is, well, you can see its name. So its name, what did we want? We want, let's look at enable. So it's core enable selected nodes. That text is automatically generated from the name of the action. And what we do is we just make it all lowercase and put hyphens between the words. So here we have my text editor. We want to be in the editor code. So we drill down. So we're in packages, node modules, at node-red, editor client, source, JavaScript. And we're going to search in this folder for core hyphen. I've already forgotten what I'm looking for. enable selected nodes. So I search for enable selected nodes. So by searching for that text, it doesn't find it, which is, what have I missed? Okay, so let's do, have I misspelt it? No. Sorry, core colon, because we're awkward like that. Right, yes. So core colon enable selected nodes. So any of those actions, if you know how to map the name you see to, you make it into kebab case, as we call it, with the skewers for spaces, you can find in the source code where that action is defined. And here we are in view.js. Now view.js is a behemoth of a source file because it does all of the hard work of drawing the view. It's far bigger than it should be, and want to spend some time refactoring that, but that's a topic for a whole different day. But here you can see we register a whole load of the default actions in the view. So we've got undo, redo, selecting all nodes, the zoom in, zoom out ones. But crucially, we've got the enable and disable selected nodes. So they call, so when you add the action, you give it a name and the function that should be called. So when we call enable selected nodes, that in turn will call the set selected node state false, because we are because the Boolean flag is whether it's disabled. So false because we don't want it disabled, or true because we do. Let's go find that function definition, set selected node state. For those of you wondering, I'm using Atom. I haven't made the leap to VS Code. It probably will happen at some point, but inertia keeps me here. So selected node state, this is kind of a prototype function that we can follow for what we want to do with the node labels, but for one crucial difference, which I'll come on to in a sec. Essentially what this does is it makes sure we're in the right mode in the editor. So there are certain states the editor can be in that we wouldn't want this action to trigger. And in fact, the logic there is slightly wrong. So that there's a bug there that's very subtle that you guys could go hit if you tried, but I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I'll probably fix it before 1.1 is released. Essentially what it does then is it looks at what's selected, and again the way it does this in this code is slightly out of date. It works, but there's a better way of doing this today. This function's just predated some refactoring that went on recently. It loops over all of those nodes. It checks that the node is one that can be enabled or disabled. It then checks to see, is the node's current state, which is node.d, does that match the state we want it to be in? Is it disabled or not? If it doesn't match, then we change its value and then do some more work. But crudely, that's all we're doing. We're just getting the list of nodes that have been selected, checking each one to see, does its state match the state we want it in. So that's what we're going to replicate. But I mentioned how view.js is this huge file. Because of that, a little while ago we introduced this file alongside it called view. One sec, just lost my place. So set selected node state. Right, that's goodness. So we added this view tools file. So this is actually where we add new actions for the view, and some of the ones in view.js will move over into this file. So in fact, this is the one that controls things like moving the view, scrolling the view with the keyboard, aligning selection to the grid is in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by we're actually going to write some code now. We're only 26 minutes in and he's starting to write some code. So let's look at this. We want to add a new action, so we do red.actions.add core, and now we need to think carefully about, well, what's the actual action title going to be, and you know, for kind of consistency with the world, we're going to say show selected node labels. Oops, labels. And when that's called, we are going to call a function called set selected node label state true, because we're going to want it to be shown. And then let's just copy that and make it the reverse, which is hide selected nodes. Oh, I spend more time trying to get the name. You know, naming things is hard. Show selected nodes. Selected node. Right. What was our other function called? Enable selected nodes. It does feel like nodes ought to be singular. Show selected node labels, because it's the labels we're showing. Node labels. I'm going to go with node labels. Let me know in the chat if you think that's foolish or not, but that's what we're going for now. If you disagree, you're welcome to pull request on top of mine. Yeah, plural, greater than one node. I'm thinking it's the label, nodes label. It's like inspectors general or inspector generals. It's the labels that we are hiding, and they are node labels. So it's a plural of node labels rather than nodes label. Anyway, I'll do a whole other hour on the naming of things, but for now let's just stick with node labels. Yeah, got to get the balance between the grammar and the description. But again, until this is released, it's entirely tweakable, which is good. So let's actually define that function. So set selected node label state, and we're going to pass in label shown. And for now, let's just do a console.log hi Twitch. In fact, let's do hi Twitch, and then what did we call it? Label shown. So I saved that, and if I just switch back to my terminal, you can just see it zoom past, and again, it's so quick I can't even show it in action, but that has rebuilt the editor source. So if I go and reload, let's just deploy those changes so we have some nodes that are in a mixed state. Just going to bring up the JavaScript console, and then we want to run, what do we call it? So show selected node labels. So if I run that, you can see in the terminal I'll get hi Twitch true, and hide selected node labels, and I get hi Twitch false. So that's how simple it is to add new actions. So I think there's certainly interesting things that third-party nodes could do to add built-in actions for their nodes where it makes sense. They show up in this, and crucially then the user can assign keyboard shortcuts. So to help with our testing, I'm just going to fire up the keyboard shortcut dialog, and we're going to assign shortcuts. Now this is where I always struggle trying to think, well, what shortcuts haven't I used yet? Let's just have a look. I think so I'm going to take advantage of the fact we can do composed keystrokes. So I'm going to, just for the sake of doing something, how do we do this? I've forgotten how to do this. We're going to do Shift Alt L followed by H. So Shift Alt L, release H to hide it. I'm probably overcomplicating things here. And then this one wants to be Shift Alt ls to show. Oop, thank you, 1Password. Right. Oh, 1Password. I see. This is. Don't save. Oh man. Really wish there was a way for a website just to tell 1Password just to go away. Anyway, in fact, I should tell 1Password to ignore this site, which I have done on my other machine, but again, a story for another time. So having done that, if I do Shift-Alt-L-H, you can see in the console, well, let's clear it. So Shift-Alt-H and Shift-Alt-L-S. There. So I've now got a keyboard sequence to trigger the action, make life easier for testing. Let's switch back to the code then. Let's just think about, okay, what do we actually need to do? The first thing we need to do is get a list, find out what we've got selected. So we can do that, and this is where the enable disable state function I showed you, because it was in view.js, it was accessing the internal data structures of the main view directly, which is a bit naughty and something where, well, I've been trying to remove. So we're not going to just copy and paste what it does. So I'm going to show you the right way of doing it. So Vue provides this function called selection. Let's just go have a quick look at that. So if I run red.view.selection, well, at the moment it returns an empty object, which is marvelous. So if I now select some stuff, I run it, it gives me an object with a nodes property, which is an array of all the node objects that are selected. And the reason it has that is because if I were to, say, select workspaces and run selection, then, interesting, it returns an empty object. I didn't think it would do that. Ignore me. Let's carry on. Edge cases we need to be worried by. So that's goodness. Crucially, and okay, this is where I need to show you another new feature, is the ability to group nodes. So what I'm just going to do is drag on a second function node. So I've got two function nodes, and I'm going to select those two function nodes, and I'm going to press Command-Shift-G, and I've just grouped those. So those two nodes are now tied together. If I go in to the group by double clicking on it, I can give it some style, make it look like a thing. Could give it a label, but we're not going to do that for the moment. So yeah, it lets you start to decorate your workspace. For those who saw me on Twitter a little while ago, I have worked out if you use the link nodes, if you use a link node, which is by default completely collapsed, and create a group, you actually get a completely square group. So by doing that, you can actually create Node-RED pixel art if you're very patient, and add lots of things. Now that's interesting. I've just spotted a stack trace in the terminal when I deleted that node. So I'm doing clear selection. That's, yeah, like I said, we're in the dev branch. Anything could happen. So let me just capture that, and I'm not going to trace that down now. It's relatively harmless, but I'll fix that another day. So we can group, but the main point was, yeah, that stack trace is going to keep happening, but I think it's okay. If we select all this stuff and then do selection, note how if we look at what is selected, it's got the inject node, the debug node, and it's got this group node. So it says I've only got 3 things selected, which is true. You know, at a high level, I've got those 3 things selected. Now, there's almost a philosophical question here of, if I say at this point hide the labels of everything I've got selected, would you expect that to apply to the nodes inside the group or not? And this is one of the buglets with the enable disable nodes, at the moment, that stuff won't go into... in fact, that stuff will go into the group, because, again, the way it's using the internal data structures of view.js. But for the API we're going to use, red.view.selection, it just gives us sort of the top level of things that are selected. So that's something we've got to keep in mind. In fact, I'm just going to deploy this because this is going to be a useful sort of flow to test some edge cases with. Okay, let's write some more code. So we've got the selection, and first thing to do is just check whether the selection has any nodes in it. Otherwise, there's not much for us to do. So there are some nodes. Now, what we're going to do is, because I'm going to suggest we want, if we say hide the labels, we want it to hide the labels of all the nodes inside the group as well. Otherwise, you wouldn't have selected the group. We want to build up a list of nodes we're actually going to do this operation on. So we have the nodes that the views told us about, selection.nodes.for each. We're going to have to examine each one and see, is that a group node or not? But also, the edge case I always forget about is when you're inside a subflow, the virtual nodes that represent the inputs and outputs show up as nodes in a selection. So we need to make sure they don't get swept up in this action, because they aren't the sorts of things that we care about. So if it's not a subflow and if it's not this new group type, then we'll just add this node to the list of things we're going to work on. Else, if it is a group, what we're going to do is use a brand new API that I'll forgive you guys for not knowing because I've only just added it. We are using red.group.getNodes, which is a function that you give it a group and it will return a list of all the nodes inside it, and by passing true as a second argument, it will recurse. So if it finds a group inside the group, inside the group, inside the group, it will extract all of the nodes back. I see in the chat a question about whether the group will shrink or grow when showing hiding labels. I will, you'll see for yourself very shortly, which adds some suspense. Okay, so at this point we've built up a list of all the nodes we're going to operate on. So we just do a for each of those. So this won't matter if it's an empty array or not. We know it's definitely exists. It's definitely an array. It might have some stuff in. To begin with, we're just going to do the almost like the easy work. Now, there's I will admit I've sort of thought through exactly what the code I'm writing so that I'm able to talk it through as I write. The way a node determines whether it shows its label or not. Let's just talk about that very quickly. If I export this debug node, so you can see it's JSON, somewhere in there you can see it has this L property. So a general tip is if it's a single character property, it's a system property. The kind of thing can't remember if the docs spell out explicitly, but they probably should. Anyway, L stands for label, and it's a boolean that says whether the label is shown or not. For all nodes, the default value is true. So if it does not have an L property, then it assumes the value is true. So that's why if I export, oh, that's annoying. We need to make these dialogues a bit more responsive. Anyway, if I export this inject node, it doesn't have an L property because it's showing its label. So we want to maintain that. So we're going to say if label shown, which is the desired state. So we want the label to be shown. So we have a look at the node's L property, and if it has the value of false, not is it falsy, as in, because if it was undefined, it would be falsy. We're saying, is it exactly false, explicitly set to false, then we're going to delete the property, which sort of returns it to its default value, which is true, and we'll just set this modified flag saying we've changed something about this node. Else if we don't want the label shown, we check to see if the node has an L property, or if it doesn't have the L property, because if it doesn't have it, that means it's implicitly true, or just in case, whether hold on, which way around is this? Oh, this logic always trips me up because of this. The default is true, but it doesn't exist, so it's falsy. So, oh man, this tripped me up when I was trying to get it right the other night. So if the label is not shown, so label shown is false, the desired state is the node should have, the desired state is the node should have an L property set to false. So we're trying to check whether it's not in the desired state. So the not desired state is it not having an L property, or n.L is true, which is a special edge case I'll come to in a minute. So if either of those is the case, then we want to set it explicitly to false, and again we set this flag to say we've changed this node. Okay, so we've done the work to see do we need to change it or not. So let's have a look. If we've changed it, because we've set the modified flag, we need to set the changed property, which is again an internal property of the node that doesn't get exported, but it tells the view that, well, it's what causes the blue dot to appear above the node, because some part of its config has changed. We set dirty to true, which tells the view next time it has to redraw the view that the appearance of that node has changed, so it needs redrawing. And this is such an edge case that when I did a dry run of this, it took me ages to work out why it wasn't working, because I completely forgot. For this specific case, because we're changing the size of the node, again, some of the optimizations in the view code, we only recalculate sizes if we have to. So we have to set this flag resize to true, so it knows to resize the node. So we've done all of that. That's goodness. At this point, what we can do is, let's just think. We've iterated over all the nodes. We've set their L property to the right value based on what we've asked it to be. If we've changed it, we've then flagged the node as dirty, as changed and needing resizing, at which point we can request the view to be redrawn. Oh, red.view.redraw. And we're done. Well, we're done for a first pass. So let's have a look. Again, we're getting that stack trace. It's going to upset me it's there, but let's forge ahead. If we select everything, and then try and remember the keyboard shortcut I did, so Ctrl-H, let's do show. It's done high twitch true, which is good. Did I reload the editor? I don't think I reloaded the editor. Let's just check what's going on here. That's rebuilt, that's rebuilt. Did I refresh? I don't think I reloaded the editor, did I? Right, let's try. So we select all the nodes, Alt-Shift-L, S to show, and we get an error. What have I done wrong? Node is not defined. Let's have a look, where's that? Yes, indeed, node is not defined because it should be nodes. And I'm sure VS Code would have highlighted that I was using something out of scope. Yes, I know, but there we go. Okay, well, let's fix that. Let's rebuild, reload. Just bring the console up. Select everything, do our keyboard shortcut. and the debug node is now shown, and it's marked as changed, which is good. And just to check the reverse, do the keyboard shortcut for hide, and everything hides. And indeed, you can see the group did resize, because the group is automatically sized based on the bounding box of the nodes that are in it. Okay, so that's good, but we aren't done yet. So there are two things that aren't working. One, I've edited the nodes. If I try do Control Z to undo, nothing undoes. So there's a bit more work, because we've edited the nodes. We're responsible for putting entries into the edit history to allow the editor to know there's things to undo. And you also note that the deploy button hasn't become enabled. Again, the editor, we need to tell the editor that there is a material change that needs, that the overall state is dirty, and the deploy button should be active. Sounds easy, and it is relatively. Right. First, in fact, we're going to kind of solve both problems in one go. Edit history. So the edit history within the runtime basically works as whenever you make a change, there's a variety of different types of history event. We basically have to create one of these history events and add it to the history stack. Because we're editing multiple nodes, what we're going to do is we create an individual history event for each node we're going to edit. And then we can put what I call, what's it called? There's a special event type, history event type, which is like it's a multi-event. So, so whilst there might be, if you edit a dozen nodes, rather than having a dozen entries in the history, there's just one entry that points to this list of a dozen events that should be undone in one go. So at the start of our function, I'm going to create an array of history events, and we're going to build up this array of the changes we make as we go. So this is why I took this approach in the nodes array of setting this modified flag, because we only do the history event if something has changed. So we're going to push onto the history events a new object, which has a T property, which is the type of event, which is an edit event, the node that's being edited, the changed is what is the node's current changed flag. So you see down here I changed it to true because we are changing the node, but we don't know, but we need to remember, was the node already changed before this event happened? Because when we undo the event, it has to toggle whether that blue dot's shown or not, because we could have undone the complete history of events on that node. And then we have a changes object, and then this lists, these are the node properties that, the original values of the properties that we're about to change. Now, what we want to do, of course, we need to remember what that old value is. So before we go around mucking around with the end.l property, we just set old value to the current value of end.l. We then work out if it's changed or it needs to change. So down here we can remember the old value on the changes object. That's all good. Yeah, that's all goodness. Right. So now for each node, if we've modified it, we'll add an edit event to our local list of history events. So then once we've done all of that, we can have a look at this history array and say, are there actually any, because we could have selected everything and they could already all have their labels shown, so we haven't actually changed anything, at which point there's nothing to undo. So only if the history event's length is greater than 0 do we actually want to do the call to put these history events on the stack. So history.push, so this is how we add things, and we're adding a new history event. This time its type is multi-event. The events, so that's the array of events we've built up, and then we set the dirty flag. So this is, again, the telling the history, is the workspace as a whole dirty or not? Is the deploy button enabled or not currently? And we can use red.nodes.dirty to find that out. So that will stick the event on the history, at which point, because we know we have made the workspace dirty, we explicitly set it to true. And I think we're done. So if we reload, if we select everything, and if we trigger our event to hide all the nodes, you'll see the deploy button is now enabled. That's great. And if I hit Control Z, oh, interesting. I hit Control Z, it's changed the values, but it has not restored them. What have I got wrong? Because that worked the other night. What have I got wrong? Okay, this is where I go quiet, because I'm now having to actually, with all the confidence of this was going to work first time. Out of interest, if I switch tabs and switch back, no. Okay, if I open up one of these nodes, see, you can see it's not ticked there, it's just decided not to redraw the node. Oh no, it is still hidden there. Okay, I'm getting confused now. What state are they in? So mixed state there. Oops. Let's select all. Let's trigger our event to show them. That's just the debug node. Hit Control Z. So undoing the show event worked. Yeah. Yes, that worked. So now let's hide them all. We'll Control Z. Okay, so undoing an edit. Hold on, let's get this right. Let's just do it on one node for the moment. We are going to do label hide, and what we're going to do, so we've done the action and we've stuck something on the history. So what we can do is red.history.list, and little tip, if we do a console.table of that, then we get a very handy table of all of the history stack. Unfortunately, it's a multi one, so we actually have to expand it out here. So it's a multi-event, it's got one node has been edited, changes L undefined, which is what it wants to be. I suspect it is, I suspect the undo history doesn't know how to treat undefined. So rather than solve that, and for the sake of getting this done, we're just going to set it's around this n.l. If we're just going to do, if it's undefined because it doesn't exist, then we know its true value is true. Otherwise, if it's not undefined, we'll take whatever value it has. I think that works. See, I thought this was going to be like a 10-minute piece of work and we'd be off at the virtual pub by now. So what have we done? So let's see if that's done it. Just do it with the one node for the moment. Hide it, Control-Z. And that now works. Yes, so that was the issue. It didn't know how to undo a value back to undefined. But I can live with that. Okay, so that all works. The only small caveat, and this is a bit I hadn't prepared, so it's going to be a little voyage of discussion, is the blessed link node. So it's the link node that started this whole idea of not showing the label. For some reason, because it felt like a good idea, the link node is a special case when it comes to the L property. So here you can see the node doesn't show its label, and when I export it, it does not have an L property. That's because for a link in or link out node, if it doesn't have an L property, its default value is false, not true like all other nodes. Which I regret. We did it sort of out of brevity, because the link nodes weren't going to ever show a label, so it was, we all make regrettable choices. So it does mean the logic around what state the node is in needs a little bit of work. What I'm going to do is go and crib some other code that knows how to deal with this. So first up, that's going to be a useful snippet. What we want to do is check whether we're dealing with a link node or not. So we check whether the node's type is link or not. Right. Then if we want the label to be shown, then either n.l is false, or we're dealing with a link node and it doesn't have the L property. Yep, that works. Otherwise, it's either, so in this case we don't want the label shown, so it's either that case which we've shown works, or it's a link and hold on, what state are we in? We want the label to be hidden, so it is a link, and n.l is explicitly set to false. No, we don't want it shown, so it's been explicitly set to true. Yeah, I think that's right. Quick test. Reload. Can add 2 link nodes. This one we're going to show its label. Just going to deploy so I have this for easy testing. Right, so this node is hidden, so let's show its label. Didn't, and it didn't. Okay, so I've got the logic wrong here. This node, we want it to hide its label. So hiding works. Yep, and I can undo that. Yeah, so I've got the logic confused around showing the label of a link node. And here's why. Because what I was doing here was I was deleting n.l to set it to its default state, but obviously link nodes have a different default state. What would be neater would be if I just explicitly set it to true. When the editor exports the nodes, it deals with deleting the L property if it needs to. So I'm not too worried about needlessly setting it to the default value rather than deleting it. He says with the bravado of someone who's not checked whether that does what he thinks. Oh, that was already hidden. I did the wrong shortcut. show, so that worked, and undo, that works. If I select everything and hide all the labels, that works, and show all the labels, that works. Excellent. I declare that a success. And we're just at the hour mark, which is, again, I was kind of hoping this would be a bit briefer, but hopefully it's been useful. Let's see. That's all the change we need to make. We modified the nodes, we do the edit history, we modified the deploy state, so that's all goodness. Yeah, that's everything we need to do. We've manually tested it. We don't have unit tests for the editor functionality, so in this instance that's not something we're going to go down the route of. So what I'm going to do is let's go. Oh man, okay, I'm going to have to do it the old-fashioned way. Question: the link node got the blue dot when it was hidden and you tried to hide it. No, that's it got the blue dot. Oh man. Oh, you see, you've spotted a. Yeah, okay, you're right. It did. Hold on, let me. What's that's running? I'm gonna tempt fate by doing a brew reinstall of a tool that I use. Okay, so that's running in the background. Good. Yeah, so let's just nail down what the point that's made in the chat. The link node got the blue dot when it was hidden and you tried to hide it. So let's see. Well, let's try it with the debug node. Just first, just to establish a baseline. Have we got this logic generally right? So let's hide that. Nothing happened. Good. No update history. Link node. Oh, it got the blue dot. It got the blue dot. Okay. So why is that? What's going on? Where's the logic failing? We were asking it to hide. So it's this bottom else block. And we're asking it to hide. We're asking it to hide and shout from the back of the classroom if you can wrap your head around the logic quicker than I can. Like I said, I regret this choice about the default behavior of link nodes being different to everything else, but here we are. Oh, it's too late in the evening and I've got a cup of tea still waiting to be drunk to spend too much time rationalizing about the logic. If it's a link node, let's just, and I know I could use the debugger and dev tools and all that sort of stuff, but for speed and haste, sometimes a console.log of the n.l property. Yeah, it's something around the has own property. I think you're right, Julian. Let's have a look. Because I know what I expect it to be, and well, it's not. So this node, let's run the event, hide, and it's come back as undefined, which is what I would expect. Oh right. Yeah. Hold on. So why is that modifying it? So I'm saying it is a link. Oh, it's this first clause. This wants to be, if it's not a link, this is the logic. There we go. So there's nothing wrong with the second half of the clause, but we only wanted the first half to apply if it was a link, if it was not a link. Yeah. Yeah, kind of made sense. Let's just check that. Yes, no dirty mark. And let's just check this one. No dirty mark. Good. We are golden. Thanks for spotting that. Now let's have another go at this. Hopefully TIG's now going to work. Yes. So this is TIG command line Git client that I use, just easier than because it's interactive. So with modified view tools, we are going to commit that. We're going to say add core. Oh, what did we call the darn things? Show selected node labels. Let's in fact add actions to toggle node label visibility. Okay. In fact, I'm going to quit without committing this because I'm going to do this property, and I'm already on the dev branch. So whilst being me, I could just commit straight to the dev branch. I'm going to do it a proper way, do a feature branch, and at least give Dave CJ a chance to have a glance at this code. Node labels. So we create a new branch called node labels. Now let's commit that change. Add action to toggle node label visibility. Is that all good? Git push, and then it shouts me. So, and because I never remember the command, I let it shout at me, and then I just copy and paste to set the upstream. And boom, and then it very handily gives us this link which we follow. And we wait for GitHub and checking mergeability. And key thing is we don't want to merge to master. We want to merge to dev. Add action to toggle node label visibility. So being a good citizen, I read carefully the pull request template, and I delete the great swathes of it that just my OCD kicks in. Delete the comments, leave in the real content. I tick an X saying it's a new feature. It may get rejected if I haven't discussed it on the forum first. I think I'll forgive myself that one. Proposed changes. Adds a pair of actions to toggle the node label visibility in the editor. And again, for completeness, that's just core show hide. Okay, checklist. I have read the contribution. I wrote the contribution guidelines, so I have read them. I haven't discussed it on Slack, but I'll give myself a pass on that. I haven't run Grunt. Well, that's a good point. I mean, yes, we haven't got unit tests, but we do have a JS hint. So I will just run Grunt, and I'll kill it in a sec because we don't need to run all the unit tests, but JS hint editor, 69 files, lint free. So I'm going to kill it at that point because everything else from there is runtime stuff that we haven't touched. So I can tick that box with a pretty honest heart. And I've added suitable unit tests. Well, there aren't suitable unit tests for this area, so I'll pause with that. And I will say, because it's only fair, created live on Twitch. Just for posterity. Yeah, merge to dev, sanity check, that all looks good, preview it, that looks good, create pull request. There we go, pull request done in 1 hour 10 minutes. Slightly longer than I thought, but hopefully that's been helpful. That's kind of the process. Hopefully that was a bit of an insight into the internals of the editor. I mean, a very small snapshot, but I think the idea of actions is quite a powerful feature. You know, once we added that, it became so much easier and quicker to add new things. Actually, maybe one quick thing to show. There's a file called keymap.json, and this defines the default keyboard shortcuts for the actions in the editor. So you would have seen I haven't added a default action for this. I think I tend to avoid adding we don't add keyboard shortcuts to every action. There's just not enough keyboard shortcuts available, which don't end up trampling on a user's own preference. But this is where I could add an entry to specify a keyboard shortcut for those actions so that you would all get that keyboard shortcut when you next installed, but I'm not going to do that right now. So there's thought of quite a few things I can do in future streams. Like I said, there's a bunch of actions in... Forgive Alexa, just...
Sorry, but I couldn't find what you're looking for.
I don't know why she's quite so loud in here. She shouldn't be. Anyway, excuse that interruption. A whole bunch of actions are in Vue.js that need moving over, and some will need refactoring to use the the external APIs of the Vue to get hold of things. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully it was interesting. As I'm going to archive this off to YouTube, probably on my personal channel rather than the Node-RED channel. I don't know yet. It'll end up somewhere. And hopefully I'll just start doing this a bit more regularly. As I think whenever I can find relatively self-contained things that I can resist the temptation just to work on there and then save them up for doing an hour on a Monday evening. I hope it's interesting. And it's fun for me talking through it. It helps me rationalize what I'm doing, talking it out loud. What was I going to say? There was one other thing. A question from my YouTube personal channel. I am... Yeah, that's a good point. I don't really have a short link for that. I will share the link to the replay for this, wherever it turns up. Need to decide whether it's suitable on my personal channel or it should go on the Node-RED channel. The other thing that might happen is I may get co-opted into the IBM Developer Twitch team, because they do some really good stuff on IBM Developer Twitch. And now I've raised my head above the parapet as someone's prepared to do live streaming, I may get co-opted into doing some of this on their channel as well from time to time. We'll see. Although that stuff may be more using Node-RED to do interesting stuff as well. Oh, and they promised... Oh, I believe I've just been promised cookies by those guys. Matt, I will expect them in the post. I guess the question have been asked about 1.1 release schedule. So plan is get the beta of 1.1 done out the door, maybe even this week. That's what we're kind of working towards. Now we've got the info sidebar stable and we're pretty happy with the functionality. Now the grouping is in. There's a couple more pull requests to just get in. And I think we're pretty close in terms of everything we would want in 1.1. There's a couple bigger pieces, some quite big subflow enhancements from our friends at Hitachi that we want to get in, but they're quite big changes still waiting to be reviewed. So we don't want to hold 1.1 up too much longer. But if we can at least get a beta out in the next week or so, get the groups feature into your hands, get the info sidebar, get usability feedback and all that stuff, that will be good. And then we can get 1.1 done in hopefully, when are we, mid-May. Then in a month's time or so we'd get 1.1 final out the door. But that's the plan. We'll see how it goes. Ideas around doing some more live streams on more complex use of Node-RED. I don't know if anyone tuned in to the Ask Me Anything session we did hosted by the OpenJS Foundation. That's on their YouTube channel, on their blog. Go search that if you missed it. And that was just a fun hour, Dave and I answering some of your questions and covering some of the history of Node-RED, where we see it going, all that sort of stuff. Afterwards, we all agreed it was a really good thing to do, and we want to do more of. Whether it's what format it takes, whether it's here on Twitch, whether it's some more YouTube live sessions. One idea we had is just having a semi-regular office hours where people can sign up to get 10-20 minutes of our time on a Zoom call, or however. I don't know, lots of ideas. What can we do to just try and be more accessible to the community? I personally, I'm keen to do more to help people contribute to Node-RED itself. So we've got a superb community, lots of the regular faces I see in the chat here, who are great at helping people use Node-RED. I'm keen on trying to focus my efforts to help people contribute to Node-RED, because that's a big area of growth for us. We want to get more people involved, contributing, whether it's ideas, whether it's code, documentation, bug fixes, whatever it might be. So that's kind of why I want to do this particular type of live streaming. So it's not about using Node-RED, it's about code development of Node-RED itself. So hopefully that's interesting. I think I haven't set fire to the house doing this, so hopefully we can do it again next week. But I have run over. I wanted to try and keep it to an hour. I'm not, I could keep prattling on for a long time. Oh, I just see there's an extra notification on my pull request, and it's coveralls telling us somehow we have decreased our code coverage, but I can live with a 0.04% decrease. I mean, that's a topic for another live stream. For a long time, our code coverage was it was up to about 90, low 90s, 92, 93. But some work we did middle of last year, I think perhaps some of the project's work when we added it has dropped our code coverage right down into the high 70s, which always pains me to see. So that could be another topic of just some time spent writing some unit tests, whether it's educational, you just keep me company whilst I churn through writing some tests, I don't know. But yeah, lots of things we could do. If you've got any ideas, let me know. Chat here on the forum. I did post to the forum I was doing this. Feel free to reply to that if you've got any feedback, any ideas. Otherwise, I think I'm going to call it, and I'm going to finish this cup of tea that's been sat, that I've had about 2 sips out of in the last hour. It's a big cup. It's almost warm. So great. Well, thanks everyone. I hope that was useful. I'm going to stop the stream. Cool. Yeah, stay safe. Stay alert. I think that's the message we're meant to share now. Stay alert. Who knows what alerts are happening. Yeah. Great. Bye all.